Hey, welcome back, everyone. We've been talking for a while now about inflation, about recession. It looks like we're going to end up with probably a combination of the two, the way it's heading. At the same time, though, the Federal Reserve may soon have to, ironically, roll back the very thing they're trying to do right now to stop the currency from collapsing, which is, of course, print more money, yet again, because they need to bail out the government. And so while they are again raising interest rates to prevent that from happening, in the near term, we're going to face another crisis, which is the government facing a default. And in order to avoid that default, very likely they're going to have to print more money, which is going to ironically undo the very thing they're trying to fix right now with the high interest rates. Folks, I want to explain what this means. We'll break that down. Also, California officials want to base gun control laws on ideology. Which really has been one of the big concerns among conservatives, especially when it comes to the red flag laws. Concerns that, they say it's about mental health issues or people talking about, doing shootings online or things like that may be reported. That's the narrative. The concern is that it's going to be based on political ideology about things related to that. And in California now, they're trying to do just that. I'll be showing you that. But also, really, a lot of these gun laws really don't have much of a chance of surviving now. And part of this is due to the recent ruling from the Supreme Court. Now, the real meat of that, in my opinion, has not really been discussed that well publicly. Because when Clarence Thomas and other Supreme Court justices recently ruled against New York City or New York on its gun control laws, making it so it's very difficult to get a concealed carry permit, and overturned that, making it so that it's now much easier to get a concealed carry permit. They also wrote their deeper analysis, and in that, they made new ways to designate gun control laws, and the burden is now on the government, not on the governed. This is going to have massive sweeping impacts on gun control laws across the entire United States. I'm going to be talking about the real meat of that and what that means for us. At the same time, folks, Republicans are really resurging right now. A lot of you have been wanting updates on what's happening with the, let's say, investigations into Dinesh D'Souza's documentary, the claims in that, 2,000 Mules. A lot of you want to know what's being done about election integrity. Well, a lot is being done. I'll be going over some of those lawsuits today, some of those different cases today, and show you really how it looks like Republicans are kind of on the offense right now in terms of voter fraud and in terms of looking into the claims that Dinesh D'Souza made in his documentary. That said, folks, as always, after about the 20-ish minute mark, we will be jumping exclusively to Epic TV. So if you're on YouTube, Rumble, jump into the description below the video, get your free trial. We're giving you a 14-day free trial. Grab that, come join the discussion. We have live chat. There's always a great discussions happening in the chat. And that said, folks, let's jump into the first story for the day. First of all, I want to mention Ghislaine Maxwell has now been sentenced to prison. Ghislaine Maxwell, of course, being the associate of Jeffrey Epstein, who allegedly killed himself in his prison cell by hanging himself and breaking his neck, jumping off like a 3-foot bed. Ghislaine Maxwell, of course, now also on suicide watch, but now she's also been sentenced to 20 years in prison. Epic Times has a story on this. It says, Ghislaine Maxwell, who was once an international jet-setting socialite, was sentenced to 20 years in prison on June 28th for trafficking young women to be used for the sexual exploits of her employer and one-time romantic partner, Jeffrey Epstein. The 60-year-old was convicted on June 29th in federal court on 5 of 6 counts of sex trafficking, including 1 count of trafficking a minor. During the trial, an expert witness testified about the grooming techniques Maxwell and Epstein used to lure their victims. One such victim, known to the court as Kate, referenced those techniques in a written statement submitted to the court prior to the sentencing hearing, saying in part, "It was the very skilled grooming perpetrated on me intentionally and consistently that instilled in me the belief that I could not say no to Ghislaine Maxwell or Epstein." Now, unfortunately, again, we're not being given many details on the trial. We're not being given really the details of the clientele list, and frankly, the charges she faced were very likely a very small sampling of what she could have been charged with, based on what we knew about Epstein and based on his previous charges, not the one that he allegedly killed himself on, but the one prior to that, which is, of course, that he was running an international sex trafficking ring heavily using children. Now, on that note, the documents on that were not made public because the judge deemed them as being too disturbing, essentially, for the public to see, and which means the clientele list is still unknown. That was, of course, the big thing people expected and hoped would be made public through this trial. That part of the trial did not come through, but Ghislaine Maxwell has been sentenced to prison. Now, folks, before we go on, we do have a sponsor today. This episode is brought to you by American Hartford Gold. Inflation as it is at its highest levels in 40 years, interest rates are skyrocketing, and a recession now looms ahead of us. Caught between runaway inflation and a recession, our retirement accounts are in real danger. If you want to protect your future, you can call American Hartford Gold. They can show you how to protect your savings and retirement accounts by diversifying your portfolio with physical gold and silver. All it takes to get started is a short phone call, and they'll have physical gold and silver delivered right to your door or into our IRA or 401k. And they make it easy to do that as well. They have the highest rated, they're one of the highest rated firms in the country with an A+ rating from the BBB and also thousands of satisfied clients. If you call them right now, they'll give you up to $2,500 of free silver on your first order, and also a free safe on all qualifying first orders as well. So don't wait, call them now. That's 877-260-2764, or you can text Joshua to 65532. And big thanks out to American Hartford Gold for sponsoring today's episode. All right, folks, those of you curious, the tea today is a Taiwanese oolong tea, one of my current favorites, actually. All right, folks, let's talk about the economy. Because, frankly, it was looking bad. It's going to get a whole lot worse, right? It was looking bad. We have not seen the end of it, and the very thing that was having problems before is about to become, well, the thing they're trying to fix is doing a 180, and it's going to come back, very likely. Let me explain how this is going to play out, very likely. Epoch Times has this article here. It says, Fed will soon return to money printing to avert government default, says analyst. Let me show you this. Now it says, for all the talk about combating inflation, the Federal Reserve is likely to reverse course and continue to print substantial amounts of money because doing otherwise would threaten the federal government with insolvency, according to macroeconomic analyst Luke Groman. Fed Chairman Colin Powell has been talking about the central banks aggressively raising interest rates in order to tighten the money supply, curb demand, and thus relieve the inflationary pressure in the economy. Now, on that note, inflation hit a high of 8.6% in May. That's a 4-decade high, right? The Fed raised interest rates 2 weeks ago by 0.75%, the most in over 20 years. It will only take a few months, however, for the Fed to reverse course on that. So, of course, we're seeing now the beginnings of the impact on the economy where the Fed raised interest rates close to 1%. They're saying now they want to raise it by 3% within the next really like 6 months. They're even hinting at even higher than that. Now, of course, what that means is basically everything is going to cost a lot more. You're going to watch some fire sales in the meantime while companies liquidate their assets. And so from the consumer standpoint, you and me, going to the store, you might see a lot of things on sale coming up soon because companies want to liquidate their stock. They want to liquidate their assets, essentially, which means they want to buy up fewer supplies next time around, and then you're going to start feeling the pain of it. This could be a process that's going to drag out for years, very likely. And if you understand the Federal Reserve's boom-bust cycles and how these things work, typically when they reduce interest rates, they lower the interest rates, you have a boom, economic boom. When they raise interest rates, you typically have a bust, like a recession. Now, they're doing both. Well, they've been doing both. And so they tried keeping them very low, but they had them almost at nothing under Obama. They raised them very high under Trump. They tried reducing them again under Biden. And they found that basically they couldn't keep them that low under Biden because, well, federal government, and it wasn't just, it was Republicans and Democrats voting for these massive COVID relief bills, these international bailout bills. things of those sorts, trillions upon trillions of dollars that they wanted to spend immediately, and giving Americans, like a $600 kickback, basically, for really a lifetime of debt. Now, the problem you're going to have with this is the Fed right now is trying to fix this. They're trying to reel in inflation, because if inflation goes up, that starts eating at your bank account. It means the money in your bank, even though the number on the bill stays the same, the actual value starts going down, meaning the buying power goes down, and you're essentially being robbed blind, essentially, by the hidden tax that is inflation. Now, they have to reel that in. And reeling that in means raising interest rates, which means, we're going to start feeling the squeeze of an actual recession. The problem with that, though, is that because things are so bad, unfortunately, that is also unsustainable, because very likely they're going to have to, again, lower interest rates, print more money in addition to keeping high interest rates. So they're keeping the high interest rates, but they're going to have to keep printing more money in order to bail out the government. And so they're throwing you under the bus to bail out the government, rather than just cut government spending, which, that'll technically be the option. Screw you over, or, cut government spending. Chances are they're going to choose to screw you over. Let me explain. It says the problem is that higher interest rates mean the government will have to pay more interest on its debt, which now stands at over $30 trillion. Moreover, higher rates mean less credit and less economic activity. What is already becoming apparent is that the higher mortgage rates, again, we're in the middle of a big housing bubble again, higher than and worse than in the 2008 one, regardless of what mainstream media tries saying. Higher mortgage rates means fewer home sales and less construction. That means the government will start collecting substantially less in taxes. So the government has to pay higher interest rates because they're raising the interest rates, higher interest rates on over $30 trillion in debt, because they've been substantially raising our debt, as, again, they're doing all these different bailout packages and all that stuff. Higher interest rates on that. At the same time, they're going to be getting less money in taxes substantially. So less money for the government, but more money to pay for the government. What do? Now, meanwhile, a contracting economy translates to higher welfare expenses as more people go to the government for relief, like unemployment and like other things where people lose their jobs or lose their, the way to sustain themselves, and they have to turn to government handouts. The government is then burdened with that as well, not to mention the fact that we're being flooded by illegal immigration, which also requires housing and other programs, and they have, of course, Biden has been using the parole system. Normally, they would not be eligible for social welfare and things like that. Biden has been using the parole system as a loop around for that. He's been granting them parole, and by granting the hundreds of thousands of illegal aliens coming to the U.S. on like a monthly basis, by granting them parole, it makes them eligible for all the social welfare benefits in addition to all the other pressure we're feeling. Now, this is what this expert says. He says the U.S. government is not going to be able to cover its interest and interest-like expenses, which I call the true interest expenses: entitlement, pay-goes, treasury spending. They're not going to be able to cover that with tax receipts, which means they will have to default, or the federal government prints the difference. The Federal Reserve prints the difference. Now, again, it might not be the case that the Federal Reserve essentially screws us all over financially to bail out the government. It might be that the federal government has to default. It becomes insolvent. The chances of them being willing to do that are very, very slim, in my opinion. You're also going to have the issue that the other option would be maybe cutting government spending. Typically, government doesn't like to do that. Trump did it, but that's really a significant rarity in the history of our government, let alone almost any government. So again, pretty much unavoidable crisis at this point. You're going to have, it's a choice between either throwing the government under the bus or throwing the American people under the bus. And chances are they're going to throw the American people under the bus. Now, with this ahead of us, what are Democrats doing? Let me show you. Epoch Times says this: new bill would require Federal Reserve to prioritize racial and economic justice. So this is their solution to that. is race politics, basically, folks. It says the House of Representatives approved a bill on June 15th that would require the Federal Reserve to address social justice concerns, expanding the scope of the central bank's mandate beyond traditional priorities of price stability and economic well-being. The House voted in favor of H.R. 2543, the Racial and Economic Equity Act, equity, i.e. socialism, which would amend the Federal Reserve Act of 1913 to expand the mandate of the central bank. They want to expand what the Federal Reserve is in charge of. They want to make it bigger, which has been, again, since 1913, which has traditionally consisted of maintaining price stability and full employment, something which they've never actually been able to do properly. They can't even do that right. Typically, the Federal Reserve has the opposite effect of what it claims to do. Typically, they're more the source of problems rather than the solution to problems. If you look back at the different crises America faced over the course of the past 100+ years, where we've had the Federal Reserve. Now, this bill the Democrats want on this, it would have a clause that would oblige the Fed to promote racial and economic justice. The bill also introduces new provisions for inclusive lending practices, promoting diversity in financial institutions, and reducing sexual and racial discrimination in housing, all of which the Federal Reserve would be responsible for under the new rules. Now, the bill, which was sponsored by Representative Maxine Waters, a Democrat from California, I could see Maxine Waters doing this, and 5 other Democrats, passed the House only by a slim margin of 215 to 207 votes. Now, on that note, even though Biden has suggested he would sign this, something similar to this, if it were to come to his desk, the chances of this getting past the Senate are very slim. But it does demonstrate, I think, where the government is placing its views on things. Because remember, the choice very soon, either cut government spending or make the government insolvent, or basically screw over every American in the country by bailing out the government by printing more money yet again, rolling back the very thing that they're trying to fix right now by raising interest rates. Right. So here we are. Again, this suggests, based on the position of the House at least, that the choice when that time does come is going to be bailing out the government, essentially. Now, on this note, too, the situation, and I'm sorry to be the bearer of bad news yet again, folks, but the problem with gas is going to get a lot worse, and gas is also has a big impact on the broader economy. Remember, one of the big problems we're looking at, in addition to everything else, is the fact that a lot of businesses are having trouble keeping up operations because operation costs are going up. Also, you have a supply chain crisis. You have a supply chain crisis and a lot of things related to this. Now, with that, the gas situation is very likely going to be going from bad to worse. Let me show you this. This is Twitter. This is Biden talking with President Macron of France, because Biden was counting on these Arab countries to produce more oil. But you can hear, although the French president is saying this kind of very lightly, they turned the mic up so you can hear what they're saying. Basically, Biden's being told by the French president that essentially all these Arab countries are already producing at max capacity, meaning they cannot produce more gas. Let me play this for you.
Increasing the production so I got him, he told me 2 things. One, I'm at the maximum, what he claimed, and this is my complete commitment. Second, he told me, according to us, the Saudis can increase a little bit, but 150 or a little bit more, than they don't have huge capacities at this stage, before 6 months time. The last one, the very last point is about what we do on the Russian oil. He told me that we are sure.
Thank you. We got to keep up.
Now, what does that mean, folks? Remember that Biden's stance on oil is remember they're refusing to renew domestic oil production in the United States. They're refusing to improve the situation of oil, like maybe the Keystone Pipeline, things that would increase production, things like cutting taxes or cutting costs for oil producers. Remember, one of the issues you have in the United States is we haven't had a new oil refinery since like the 1970s, I believe, or 1980s. Not only have they not built a new one, but the existing ones have folded, meaning we have, again, we're producing at max capacity based on what we have. Biden's stance, according to his press secretary, is that the solution to the oil crisis is for oil companies to produce more oil. Not only now, as this reveals, right, not only have we seen that the domestic oil producers are producing at max capacity because they have limited capacity, they need to build more refineries or get an oil pipeline again, if they want to do that, or we need to get it internationally. Now, we could technically get it from Russia, but of course that's not going to happen with the sanctions and the war right now with Ukraine. And so Biden's going to the Arab countries, and as he's being told by Macron in this video, that is also not an option. Now, some people are taking this as a direct appeal to Biden from Macron to renew domestic oil production in the United States, because as we remember, under Trump, not only was America producing enough oil for ourselves, we were producing enough oil to become net exporters. America was a net exporter of oil. What happened between then and now is that Biden's first week in office, he began eliminating those policies that allowed for America to become a net producer of oil. Right? He rolled back those policies. Now, let me show you the other option. This is Kamala Harris also. This is Breitbart here. It says Harris can't name any tools besides gas tax holiday to lower gas prices. And briefly on this for you, I'll play the video in a sec, but basically the Biden administration, their current solution is twofold. One is they're encouraging oil companies to produce more oil. Domestic and international oil producers are saying they're already producing at max capacity. That is not an option. The other thing they're talking about is doing a gas tax holiday, I believe of 3 months, where they're not going to charge Americans taxes on gas. And Harris here is suggesting that's her solution. Let me show you what she's saying.
Speaking of disparities and just overall anxiety, I want to ask you about the economy.
Yeah.
There is a lot of anxiety about the economy. People's wallets are really being hurt. Right now, gas prices, as you well know, they're still near about $5 a gallon. The president said he wanted a gas tax holiday. It doesn't seem like it's going anywhere in Congress. What else is in your toolbox? Is there anything else you can do to help bring down the cost of gas?
Well, first of all, let's just say that this is a very real issue. And we have to do something about it. And it's one of our highest priorities as an administration. So there is the piece that is about gas and bringing down the cost of gas, which in large part has exploded because of Putin's war in Ukraine. The president is in Europe right now, talking, as he has been, to bring our allies and partners together so we can have a common defense around what we believe to be democratic principles around sovereignty and territorial integrity. But there are other things we need to do. And so, for example, bringing down the cost of prescription drugs. We are fighting to say something like insulin should cost no more than $35.
All right. Anyways, Harris has a very interesting way of explaining things where she's asked about a crisis and she'll say things like, yes, we are facing a very big crisis. And the question you ask is a very significant question because the crisis we're facing is very big. I've heard it compared to like a kid who didn't actually study for a test or for their homework, and they're trying to go in front of the class and explaining the issue, and they're just repeating essentially the question in various different ways. Now, if you dig into what she's actually saying, all she really said there is that essentially their only solution, the only one they have right now, is pausing taxes on gas for 3 months. That's it. Meaning it's a temporary solution and one that's not going to solve anything, to be honest. Now, on that note, too, she's of course putting the blame on Putin and Russia. Now, of course, you could say that Putin's war has restricted gas supplies globally. Part of that's, of course, a large part of that's due, of course, to the sanctions. But of course, we were already facing a crisis like this, regardless of that, which is, again, that domestic oil production has been pretty much, they put a cap on it, and they're refusing to continue it. As Biden says, we're part of an incredible transition. The incredible transition being to the Green New Deal type policies that they want, which has them refusing to renew domestic production. Now, folks, that said, I want to go into a lot more stuff. I want to talk about red flag laws, guns, some of what Clarence Thomas had in his clarifications, which really are going to very likely overturn a lot of the gun laws in the United States. I mean, we're probably going to watch a flood of new cases come about that are going to utterly change gun control laws across the entire U.S. And the real meat of what Clarence Thomas did with this has not been properly discussed. Now, we're going to do this on YouTube, on Epic TV exclusively. YouTube will typically give you a strike or delete your channel if you're not careful. We're talking about guns. So join us on Epic TV. Again, free trial in the description below the video if you're on YouTube or Rumble. Also, folks, we have a special episode tomorrow, interview with Stephen Mosher. We're going to be talking about the population control agenda. A lot of people talk about Bill Gates and eugenics and forced sterilizations in Africa and what the United Nations is doing with this. What the different policies in different parts of the world are, such as the Chinese Communist Party's one-child policy, which led to, again, forced abortion, the afterbirth murder of infants, the forced sterilization of mothers, which actually had the direct endorsement from the United Nations. The UN wanted to replicate those practices. And when they talk about population control, this is what they're talking about. Let me show you a trailer of that before we jump over.
So when Bill Gates and people like him, whom I refer to as the Billionaire Boys Club, they all seem to think there are too many people in the world, and I think in part it's billionaire guilt. And when they talk about overpopulation, they really mean that there are too many poor people in the world.
Now, what does that mean for us?
If you have too few children, you are on a path to basically die out over time. I saw this unfolding in China back in 1980 when I was in an operating room when they were forcibly aborting women who were 9 months pregnant with the goal of reducing China's population. 40 years later, they've reduced the birth rate to the point where there are so few babies birth rate and desperate to encourage everyone to have 3 children.
Yeah, folks, again, special episode tomorrow, 10:30 a.m. Eastern Time. Be sure to tune in. That said, let's jump over exclusively to Epic TV. Folks, we're still doing the Q&A in about half an hour. A few more stories to go into. That said, we'll see you there. All right, folks. Let's talk. Sorry, I'm doing a bit of sign the mic. Let's talk about California gun law.